So thank you for inviting me, participating in your very nice conference. I was initially requested to make a presentation on electronic data capture, and I must say that my first reaction has been that this is already in the past. We've been now talking of risk-based monitoring. We are speaking of patient support programs, which is also a new concept. And the adoption rate of all what has to do with EDC, eCRF, even if we still witness that there are still some paper supports for a number of studies and trials, we have passed the adoption thresholds for eCRF and EDC systems. And even if figures are always questionable, I've seen that for risk-based monitoring, we are mentioning between 15 and 30% of savings. I don't know how much this is supported by scientific data. Here also I have taken these figures from other presentations in other conferences, and we see that it is now part of the common knowledge that all these systems are bringing a higher quality because for many reasons. One of the reasons is that when you perform electronic data collection, then you can have timely data entry, which you cannot verify that from the paper documents. You can always antedate a document and have it signed properly. It is a very nice original, but it is false in many respects. With electronic data collections, this becomes a bit more complicated, and it has been now adopted by all the key opinion leaders and the large industry. So I would say to a large extent it is the past. It is also the present, indeed, because we have to comply from the quality assurance, quality management system, the SOPs, the personnel, they still have to be trained, and this already, well, we have now to not only the RBM with new jobs coming up, and we already have to finish to complete this, this new trend with electronic data capture and eCRF systems. Yes, we were yesterday in a meeting for the EMA that was indeed, in this respect, it stays a current issue in a meeting of the inspectors at the EMA, and with this specific subject. We had mixed in the same session RBM, EDC, eCRF systems. We know that they are acknowledged by the authorities and the regulatory bodies. This is another indication that it is already in the past in many respects. And of course there are inspection problems which are related now to the implementation as experience is growing, and I'm mentioning the comprehensive, the audit trail which is providing evidences and may help the inspectors in doing their job well. And of course there are still questions. I had a number of questions. How can we assure that the audit trail has not been manipulated by some geek person and so on? There are responses to that, actually. One of the responses is that, of course, all these systems and vendors must comply with computerized systems validation. I will not go too much into the details of it. The gold standard is 21 CFR Part 11 for the general security features which are related to the implementation of EDC systems and eCRF systems. But it's now every CRO has to know that these are part of the requirements with respect to any selected vendor that you may have to decide for. I have already also mentioned that, of course, you have to comply with, to adapt your procedures, etc. It's the whole quality management system that has to be aligned. One of the also past situation is that every piece of software was provided by different vendors. One of the trends we witness at the moment is that there is a larger demand for integrated eClinical systems, precisely because the computerized validation, computerized systems validation is a very demanding process, a costly process, and it is also inducing delays if you have to assemble different pieces of software for a given trial or a given company. And therefore, having right from the beginning a comprehensive system validated is a gain of time and is increasing the value for the one who is trying to purchase that. So, so we are starting with this view to illustrate the fact that we go towards something that was a kind of a series of niche with different systems. You had pharmacovigilance, you have centralized monitoring, you have electronic data capture, you now have also the electronic patient-reported outcomes with the opportunities of the Internet of Things and many upcoming things, mobility with the large penetration of smartphones and so on, which become increasingly used in different studies, not always trials, but in studies for sure, in PSPs also. And all these things start to be assembled to provide a comprehensive information system where the whole life cycle of the data is being electronic. We here stay in the field of clinical research. But this may change. So, to continue with a number of issues which are occurring that we had the opportunity to discuss yesterday at the EMA meeting, we also see that technologies for hosting these systems are evolving significantly. And we are now becoming more, there is a much higher acceptance to switch from a license-based process or service delivery to software as a service, meaning that you are delivering not only the software itself, but for the specific use of the software, plus the hosting, plus the support to the users, plus a number of things like that. And this is supported by the technological evolution. We speak of cloud services. Cloud is a term that needs to be defined and refined for sure. And there was a full presentation just on this topic yesterday at the EMA meeting, because there are many questions around that. I will I have copied one of the slides of one of the presenters of yesterday to try to illustrate. The main thing is that these data centers now are virtualized, and we see a segmentation in the value chain. And we have the service providers, the software vendors, who can rely now on very efficient and cost-effective, with high performance indicators, data centers, with thanks to the virtualization of services. So we now have a clear and separate, let's say, a separation, discrimination between the hardware that needs to be implemented to support the service and the logical part of it. So this enables to create dedicated domains to your data and your activities easily and in a very cost-effective way. So most of the questions of the yesterday meeting were, is this a nightmare for inspectors? How can we trace, how can we audit the whole chain of the computerized system? Do we have to do it? Is it our job? Is it our competence when we are specialized in looking at the various, let's say, specific components of the clinical trial? And this is still a debate at the moment, as we can witness. And we have to delineate what are the limits of the inspectors and how the contractual obligations, the cascade of contractual obligation need to be audited or not. This is one of the slides that was shown yesterday by the FUSE group, as you can see here. And I think it was interesting to show the progress of the technologies from the data centers perspective and how now we speak of cloud services with the main criteria to make a difference between the previous position, where we were speaking of the internet era or the client-server era, is that we now have virtualization services in big, large data centers that enable to have your own separate world, completely independent, and completely independent also of the hardware. So you can focus on your job as a service provider, which is how to operate, to maintain, to administrate your server application. And this is a small revolution also in the IT world. So to try to put aside some let's say, misconceptions, cloud services, which is frequently used to designate this kind of delivery, this kind of services, does not mean, and virtualization does not mean that the data center location, for instance, is unknown. It can be known. This is a decision. This is based on the contract and the obligations of the providers. Of course, you can have. It is part of your requirements as a purchaser to have a dedicated operating environment, as I was saying. This is a possibility. You do not have to mutualize, to share. You may share the hardware, but not the world within which you have your data. Even the hardware, even if we make a clear separation in your contractual requirements and specifications, you may have the requirement that the hardware is also dedicated, even if on one single hardware server you may have two different environments for two different clients, which you are operating. So you can have a full control, even in the cloud situation, of the whole chain for protecting the data, and now you become inspectable easily. And you can give the evidence that you are controlling, and you can validate the computerized system from the hardware part to the logical side of your own software application, including the operating systems, including the whole environment. Computerized systems validation means that if you deploy your application in a different environment, you have to perform again at least a part of your validation, because it's a new computerized systems as a whole. So all these issues, I just want to go through some of the issues which are current in the number of debates and which are related to EDC, without going too much, diving too much into the details. They become very quickly very technical, but I will be happy to answer any questions you may have. One of the issues also that was mentioned yesterday as not being enough frequently integrated into the reports, into the contractual obligations, is all what has to do with decommissioning and archiving. This was mentioned also by Stefano. Long-term archiving is posing problems. And we just want to remind that there are now a number of possibilities to have long-term archives generated, and the CEDISC standard, it's the Clinical Data Interchange Standard Consortium, among others, is having a certification program on ODM archives, which are XML-based archives that can be generated and that enable to separate clearly the software which is used to collect or to display the data from the data themselves. And this kind of archive can be maintained for a long time and read by different programs without any difficulty. So these are some of the requirements you should put or you should look at, and be careful that they are reflected in the contractual obligation of the vendor with whom you contract. I just wanted to show you the kind of information that is representing what is the data separately from the software. How do you detach that? The current standard includes all the metadata. Metadata means all the data that describe the CRF. They are also, these archives are also including all the management data, description of the investigational sites, investigators, their rights, and the full audit trail, in addition to the clinical data. And you see that the certification process is having different what so-called use cases before you get certified for a software between the clinical data and the metadata. In metadata, we include also the management data here. So this is very important to be aware of. And we can foresee that in the coming decade, all what has to do with the behavior that you may have implemented in your eCRF, the edit checks, some presentation formats will be included in these generic formats for your archives. So you will be able, even 20 years away from the initial data capture, to reproduce all the behavior of your initial software with a different software. We also see that in the witness that there is an increased use of electronic patient-reported outcome solutions. This is also coming with the, as I said, the larger penetration of the smartphones in markets, which is almost achieving saturation. 2 years ago at the first eCRF conference, as I was mentioning, that smartphone penetration had achieved more than 70% of the market. So we are very close. So this has changed also the approach from the pharma industry and the usage of this kind of devices has become something we can speak of, and we witness it is existing. But there is also an industry shift, a semi-revolution, I would say, because when you interview key representatives of a number of pharma industry, they are claiming that they are shifting from a pharma laboratory to a health laboratory. So we come close to this concept of patient support programs. This means that you do not only deliver a drug or a medicine, you also deliver therapeutic education. You also deliver systems to monitor how this drug is being taken, what is the compliance of a given population. You are doing a lot of things surrounding patients in real-life conditions. And now the paradigm is being reversed. It's not anymore a post-marketing authorization study or trial. It becomes knowing better how a specific treatment can be better administered, its efficacy can be improved, and also knowing more about the disease itself and how the disease is affecting the everyday life of the patient. And from this data, you can now infer, recruit patients, targeted patients in smaller trials for phase 3 clinical trials to develop new approaches. And these approaches are including the drug. They have the so-called hybrid solutions, where you may have devices that will tune the dose depending on specific events that are surrounding the patient, may provide a collaborative environment between the health professional and the patient at home, and so on. So in this way, I can say we've taken the wheel, and from the phase 3 trials to the post-marketing, we now have a kind of patient support program from which we derive phase 3 trials. Exactly the opposite. So, I think I already have quite a lot commented this slide. I will skip it. With the emergence of this kind of approaches, what we see is that new stakeholders become eligible to be part of the IT infrastructure which is delivered, or which is at least involved in delivering this kind of services. Because we see an increasing use of connected devices, medical, sometimes not so much medical, which poses another problem, with large distribution scales, with the necessity to have a device management or supervisory system, with de-identified data collection in large scale, in large server farms. Now we switch from the pure cloud system where we were defining it from the term virtualization to something that becomes much larger, potentially. And then we have here to implement standardized interfaces so that we exploit data which can be independent of the specific device, because at the end, an ECG, whether it is devised by, it is delivered by ECG A, B, or C, it is still an ECG, and we try to get the relevant information which is clinically significant from it. So there can be a standardization here. And now we have the service platforms that deliver the added value for the clinical part of it, where we can interface with different support for caregivers, professionals, or even the patients themselves. So stakeholders, we now witness that there is a value chain that may involve different stakeholders, those who are developing connected devices, those who are potentially distributing connected devices or gateways, and that can often, and we see more and more telecom operators being involved in this kind of delivery on a wide, through the distribution power and channels they have to give more solutions to the end customer. If we are in a real life situation, the end customer has the choice. And we, in the clinical domain, we arrive only afterwards with the added value service platform. It can be risk-based monitoring with very smart algorithms. It can be a eCRF. It can be a comprehensive system. And it can be included in the overall integrated care system with interfaces not only between the modules for clinical research, but also for care delivery. In the past, in recent past, there has been a complete guidance on eSource with the idea that data can be collected directly from the medical records, the clinical, the eCRF systems, and the other approach is through the ePRO. I believe the ePRO is going to deliver much more electronic data capture in the real sense of it not entering data, but continuous monitoring of data potentially in a much quicker pace. This is already reality, becoming reality today. So what we believe is that around these patient support programs and these new approaches, there are also new types of evaluation. The protocols design will be different. The kind of data that can be exploited coming from the devices themselves can be different to a large extent. It is a territory which is still quite open to CROs. Very few of them are really in this world. So there is a good chance for every national entity to develop new skills. I just wanted to show you a couple of examples of projects which are currently running at the European level, where you start to see this kind of interfaces and comprehensive information system. This one is an IMI project where there is an actimetry device. There is all this is what I was mentioning earlier. It is delivered by provider A, including what so-called clinical knowledge hub, where all the raw data is being collected. And it can be accessible anytime. The data here are de-identified. There is no possibility to liaise, map the patient with the specific data sets which are there. And then you have the eCRF that is coming, which is interfaced with this clinical hub, and interfaces also at this point in time very, I would say, easy to implement, but there are also some interfaces with the clinical systems. And now we are responding to a call for tender. Sorry, it's in French, but I think it's an interesting example. This is why I put it there, where you see that the eCRF is a small part of the whole system. You have here the eCRF being mentioned here. But you also have all what is so-called the patient relation management, where you have telemonitoring, a lot of reporting. This is accessible by the professionals. You may have video conference, social networks, all these systems, therapeutic education, all these systems, they have to be in one single chain to deliver the support, the aid. So you see that the reason why there is an eCRF is that the new treatment where you have also added value expert systems, learning machines to adapt the treatment to the specific patterns that a specific patient is developing. It's with self-learning algorithms. They have to demonstrate the efficiency and the economic, let's say, efficiency, medico-economic efficiency of the whole pattern, to go to reimbursement, to go to a number of things like that. So the paradigm now is very different. And you see that the EDC point is really now in the past. And now these are current call for tenders. So it's not so much for the future. It's what is coming up now. So, just challenging with the initial question, maybe we are close to the end of EDC system. So if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer.
About the cloud, you said that there is a discussion about the discussion among the inspectors about acceptability of clouds. So, what is your impression about what they accept or not? Would it be something like a private cloud, what they would accept? So we know where the server is, we know and can see it, we know, I mean, somewhere outside of our organization, but we can check everything and see everything.
Yes, I think that we first need to establish a common vocabulary. The problem is that we just drop this word cloud and we don't know what it means really. And from the questions, there are questions that have been listed and were reviewed in the yesterday meeting, I think 20 questions or so, 15 questions. The first one is, who has the ownership of data, for instance? So these kind of questions, you know, it's not that much what one of the contributions to the debate yesterday was, it's not that much the question of who owns the data, but how ownership can be exercised. In electronic systems, generally speaking, this is the real question. So we need to have a better common understanding because there is a large technological background that is needed there before you come to a point where you can understand what you can really do. My personal feeling is that once we will clear all these definitions and we will have a shared view of the domain, what is really covered, then most of the issues will be easily solved, and the inspectors, they will know how to inspect. Because for the moment, as a number of concepts, they are too vague, it's difficult to have a clear inspection approach. There are things which are appearing and questions which are raised without the clear response to that. So I would say and recommend that yes, when we are in a clinical trial or a clinical study process or a health process, we should extend to the health process, then we have to be in control of all the production chain. This is the basis of the computer system validation that is already, I would say, the rule, okay? And this is feasible. But of course, in this case, you cannot exploit in the same way the data that may come from well-being connected objects or a number of devices or some social networks which are not designed for. Mm-hmm. It's a bit the same kind of questioning that you've been posing for the pharmacovigilance issue. It's not that far.
Mm-hmm. And in a slide you presented what they said about a cloud. So it doesn't mean that I cannot see the machine. I mean, I think there were 4 or 5 statements.
Yeah.
Does this mean that this
far.
is what they expect to see?
Yes, I think these
So
are...
if this is something that you can verify, they would be satisfied with cloud solution.
Yes, the role of inspectors is to secure that the whole implementation of the system is compliant with the requirements for inspection. If you have the evidence for that, from the contractual point of view, for the on-site inspection point of view, then you will comply with inspections requirements.
Okay. And another question, you said there is a debate among them, among inspectors, if they have to audit or not, or was it rather a debate if they can audit or not?
Yes, one of the questions is in relation with highly technological issues, is whether this falls into the inspection domain of the clinical research inspectors, or shall fall in the hands of experts of this kind of, let's say, infrastructure.
Okay.
And one of the persons in the audience, I think, gave a large part of the response by saying, for these large data centers, there are a number of standards. We may have to invent a standard dedicated for the health systems and the way health electronic systems can be implemented, or electronic health data can be stored and vehicled. And this is what has been attempted in France with a specific certification for health data centers. And I think this idea, along with another idea that was also pushed with the idea of independent third party, these ideas are going directly in this direction, so that we ensure that when we talk of health data, where there are privacy issues, there are a number of issues, then we have to comply with a number of specific requirements that cannot be those which are applied for Facebook, Google, or whatsoever. It has to be dedicated for that. It's a real challenge. It's a real challenge in many respects, because it's also a matter of time. Who is going to be quicker from the other? What will be the adoption rate of one of the other approach? What will be the most efficient of them? And it is also a matter of choice. What do we want our health data to be dealt with? By who? It's a real challenge for the moment, I think, in this domain. There are new opportunities. We shall not stop innovation, because these very large server farms, they are delivering very cost-effective services with an availability rate that you will never achieve if you purchase your own server, you have to train your own personnel, and do all this stuff. You will never achieve the same level of service at the same cost. Impossible. So the delivery chain is going to be a bit more complex, but it can be controlled. This is what is important.
Yoani, I think we have two aspects, a tremendous pro and maybe a tremendous cons, I don't know yet. But the pro definitely will be that in the future we have totally different access and speed up access to totally different data sources. Whether or not we are talking now about a clinical trial itself or not, but you mentioned that even within a clinical trial, we even nowadays already talk about permanent control, whatever, direct data input in a patient's diary, directly at home from the patient and so on. So that definitely is a positive aspect. The negative aspect might be that nobody really knows so far what that means for documenting all these different levels of access to data. You just mentioned who owns the data, so data protection, just to mention one, but also that even inspectors nowadays, especially the ones in the UK, who are probably, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, are the ones who are most progressively promoting this, probably by having lectures in all kinds of events, saying, okay, this is the way to go. But if you ask them, okay, what do you expect having as a documentation? the validation of the systems. You mentioned just in one slide, you have to make sure that the validation is somehow documented, and if you use it with a different device in a different environment, you have to document, validate, reproducibility tests, etc. I see tremendously shifting of activities from the original EDC and whatever, the pure data collection, to self-control and archiving of what you do with the new systems. Am I right or wrong?
No, I still think that the concept of computerized system validation is still valid and feasible. But, as I was mentioning in one of the slides, most probably the ancient paradigm that was that everybody was having different software objects or whatever the objects, validating them separately, is not going to stay for long. We will most probably witness a comprehensive approach to have integrated systems, all of it validated. It's a huge investment, of course, initial investment. But then, and also there will be different validation on which you will have to rely. There it is where it comes to the inspectors, to what is the level and the objects they have to inspect and to what extent. They may never have, there is no added value. It's a bit the same as for the site inspection in SDV. Is there an added value for an inspector from EMA to go and visit a data center, an up-to-date data center? That what they can just do is be impressed and say, oh, that's fantastic. That's the only thing that they can do. They cannot inspect. They cannot really audit. You need to have somebody who is specialized in that. So now the inspectors, they will have to rely on other inspectors who will have dedicated work. And this is all about what it is. What we see with the data centers, I was mentioning, the virtualization and so forth. This means that we see a specialization of the various job categories, the various businesses. Because, and for the CROs, we have to specialize on our jobs. Or for the software vendors, we have to specialize on our jobs to be able to deliver smarter algorithms for site data validation, for instance, whatever. Those who are going to deliver, when I was illustrating the value chain, who are going to deliver medically accepted connected devices so that you can integrate them in the health chain, the health information system. They have to comply with specific standards. And when I will perform my own end-to-end computer system validation, I will not check whether this specific device has been, I will not perform myself the validation of the device, but I will check, I will audit that this device I have selected is really complying with a number of standards and computer validation system for it, for this specific business area. So when I was showing this fragmentation of the various competencies, this is what I was meaning. There are a new separation between a specialization of the job areas, which is coming, and we have now to work with the new environment. And this has contractual implications. At the end, what we can audit for ourselves are the requirements we put in our contracts for our subcontractors, and this is what we already know in the clinical research area. Guys, time to go. Huh?
Are there any questions for Mr. Matsakis? Oh, here you are.
You mentioned something, it goes beyond clinical trials, and definitely I can see a possibility to new approaches in disease management and personalized management. Do you see any particular improvement or new paths in this area?
Yes, I was mentioning that we already see some call for tenders in this domain. And I showed you a picture that was just a snapshot of one figure that was in the call for tender. So, and I just been mentioning that. So yes, this is definitely a domain which is developing, and we are preparing the next ePRO conference in France. And one of the topics that we want to address is specifically the new opportunities for CROs, especially in the new evaluation approaches for these kind of programs, because they are different. You have different kinds of data which are collected in addition to the usual questionnaires, CRF. There are data which are collected by the different devices which are implemented, deployed, and which are also useful information. That can be some of the critical data to be analyzed, for instance. So, and the medico-economic dimension is quite often, or the risk for the patient, are quite often also very central in these things. And so there are new methodologies, most probably to be not discovered, but at least to be refined at the moment. It is an open question for the moment. So there are clearly new opportunities for CROs, yes.
I was thinking rather about, let's say, the normal medical care, which is utilizing these approaches. It's more in the United States. You may see this telemedicine centers and advisor to a patient who does not have to leave home, and even data saying the number of hospitalizations have been reduced, and et cetera, et cetera. But here in Europe, I don't see that much, and perhaps in other geographies. So do you have any data about penetration, acceptability?
No, you're right. It starts from the US at the moment, for sure, and there are domains where in Europe we are quite strong, and where these approaches are mostly needed. This is the case, for instance, of rare diseases, because you have a very small population, and with a very bad knowledge from the industry of how this disease is evolving in real-life situations. So the paradigm, this 180 degrees semi-revolution that may become a revolution at the end, they are very, very relevant. And and these approaches are developed together with the patient associations in relations with the patient registries I've been mentioned before. So in Europe, yes, we are quite, there is a push. I'm not saying at this stage it's still embryonic, it's still the beginning of it. And it's stronger in the US and in relation with a number also of biotechs which are addressing these specific therapeutic areas. So the demand is growing. Cannot size it at the moment. But we can witness from the ePRO domain that this is, we have figures, this is a market which is growing at a pace between 15 and 20% a year, and it is expected to double from now to 2020. So this gives you an idea of how this market is going to evolve.